You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and we're here today to talk about the ever-increasing cost of running a digital business. I think everybody's been feeling it over, especially the last 6 to 12 months. A lot more focus on KPIs and the overall amount of money that it costs to run an e-com business as a whole. That includes startup to Fortune 100. We actually did an earlier podcast this year with Ninniger, kind of tackling a little bit around the D2C darlings that are out there, where you have a lot of D2C companies now looking to go into retail. But today on the podcast, have a longtime friend of the network, Matt Krueger, and he's a long history in e-com and digital as a whole, and just agreed to kind of jump on and kind of walk through what he's seen in this space as a whole. But Matt, I'll kick it over to you. If you want to do a brief intro on yourself, that would be awesome. And then we'll kind of jump into the conversation. Sound good?
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds great. Thanks, Aaron. It's great to be on the podcast and appreciate the invite. It's always great to hear the content that you and the group put out. But my name's Matt Krueger. I spent the last about 10, 12 years in the e-commerce space. Started my career on the Foot Locker retail side. So I have about 10 years in soft lines, footwear, apparel, and then, went from, like I said, retail to brand manufacturing side in the footwear space. And now most recently, within the last year, I've moved over to the hard goods space, and focusing on trying to learn this industry. So, between DTC, e-commerce space on the retail, brand marketing, and I spent the last 4 or 5 years in marketplaces, global marketplaces, heavily focused on Amazon, and just kind of been knee deep in everything at e-commerce and marketplaces. So seen a lot, and but it's ever fascinating that you can never not learn more. It's amazing how fast this entire space moves, especially over the last 2 to 3 years. So for me, I kind of look at, what does the next couple of years look like, 5 to 10 years down the road. And my biggest, thing that keeps me up tonight is, this, like our topic today, of ever growing costs in e-commerce. And that seems kind of like a catch-22, is obviously my job is in there, and, that puts some concern in certain areas, but we got to be realistic about it as well. So, I look at just overall, it's kind of, a few, 3 to 5 buckets for me. It's increased, obviously, shipping and freight. And that goes to the labor of handling, warehouse costs of shipping one-off packages, to overall just getting the goods over here. You're looking at 150% increased cost just to get freight. Now we're seeing some of that come down, but what is the floor? And then where does it level out? So how do you plan your pricing and your promotions around that to cover your costs there? So that's kind of number one. We look at talent, the demand for e-commerce talent, whether that's the merchandising, business intelligence, the marketing, et cetera. There's probably, I would say, a 15 to 20% premium on that talent, just, through the pandemic and what that's caused, and all that, hits your OpEx. So you got to think about that, and many brands and retailers are trying to do more with less. From a marketing perspective, digital marketing, I think on average up 30 to 40%, depending which channel you're referencing. And then you add in, the iOS changes that have made tracking so much more challenging, which requires more, analytical talent to do that kind of acquisition. Modeling is even more, hard to attain in certain areas. So those are kind of like my top 3 areas that I'm just, trying to figure out of, what is the ceiling, what is the floor, and then how do you keep your DTC business, whether you consider DTC really truly direct to consumer or, Amazon third party, whatever it may be, how do you keep that profitable, and streamlined for currently and going into the future? Because going backwards seems a little bit, I don't know, not the correct way of thinking. I would say, I don't even know if that would be accepted, but we gotta be realistic about the future. So that's really what's keeping me up tonight. I don't know if you're hearing anything from anyone in the network of what they feel from an expense structure, but that's kind of just the three big buckets right now of where I'm trying to figure out what is the baseline to plan.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, let's just tackle them in that order then. I mean, number one, I kind of share what I'm seeing on my side, and the shipping piece is, it's not just a container cost, which started a couple of years ago, right? It's this last mile delivery cost as well. And, we're almost at the point I recorded, I think, the episode that will come out before this one with Dave Glick over at Flex around the importance of forward deployed inventory. It's almost essential now due to the fact that everybody expects 1 to 2 day delivery. In the D2C space, I mean, it's great for Amazon to do, and they have a ton of fulfillment centers. But if you're trying to get it across country from 1 or 2 fulfillment centers of your own, in 1 to 2 days, it's incredibly expensive. I mean, you literally can't make it work. You've got to get above a $50 to $60 price point for it to even make sense. And that's, so you have the freight cost coming in and it's going up, but also that last mile delivery, which is just through the roof. Like, how are you guys looking at, from your side, like the fulfillment aspect, once it's been ordered online, that last mile? Are you looking at, I would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there at the end. I think it's a really good question, and it's been interesting in my career. I spent, like I said, in the soft line. So footwear and apparel, those are small items, right? You can get multiple items in one decent sized box, where your impacts to your AOV can help offset some of those, last mile deliveries, and just that increased expectation of 1 to 2 day delivery. But now I'm switching over into hard goods. I mean, right now we sell pool tables, cornhole boards, air hockey tables. Like, these are massively large items, and even though your retail prices are higher, how much higher do they need to be just to cover, an explosion in freight? I think I was looking like 3 day ground, and that's not even hitting your 1 to 2 day expectations, was up like 40% or something like that, pending one of the carriers. So does that mean you have to increase your retail prices by 40%? When then we know what that does to volume. So you have to find, I think, set some expectations where we might have to have a break-even analysis where if you want it in 1 to 2 days, you got to charge it. The problem is if you sell on Amazon or some other area that it has a multi-fulfillment network, you're just going to kind of erode your DTC ability there. So from a channel mix perspective, you got to be really careful, because you could just be cannibalizing your business one way or the other. So we're, from my perspective, I'm actually literally building out a P&L right now from a DTC business. And I'm inflating some of our shipping and handling costs, because I'd rather be caught a little bit more conservative and be more profitable than completely underestimate and just have negative contribution margin. And then in 2 to 3 years, we're going, well, now we have to go backwards and figure this out even more. So I'm going to go probably more a little bit on the conservative side, just because the volatility of the shipping, especially in the last mile delivery, especially in the big items that we play in, is just, it's too hard to estimate right now. And I'd rather be a little bit more conservative on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right way to go. I don't think shipping costs are going down. But I think the other interesting thing that you brought up was the idea of a P&L. I know, when I was in the corporate side, running an Amazon business, when we launched it, originally the P&L was just kind of what was standard with everybody else. Here's your cost, right? And here's the wholesale price, here's the margin. But that's, as people are looking at it now, the digital, the digital part of the business needs a whole separate P&L, right? And are you going then SKU by SKU and then, doing a SKU rationalization for items that just don't make sense to be sold online? Like, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think one, you're completely right. The whole DTC side absolutely needs a separate P&L. And we've done that a little bit in the past. I would say in my most recent past, we didn't go to definitely a SKU level. We did it more probably at the category level that we would call, whether that's hiking boots versus sandals, t-shirts versus jeans, whatever it may be. I think in this new role, in this bigger space, we do look at it from a contribution margin at a at an item level, just because it can vary so much based on the size of the item within the business that we play. The shipping and handling costs on a pool table and freight costs are a whole lot different than, let's say, a concise volleyball net per se. And you have to look at it that way because the order on site may be identical, click to buy and the shipment goes through, but just the overall process to get a pool table out the door in a DTC model versus a volleyball net is substantially different, which will weigh down your P&L one way or the other. So I think you have to. The challenge is you kind of do get into some analysis paralysis where you can go too deep and you kind of forget the overall top level opportunity. So you have to just be careful of not going down too big of a rabbit hole, because with all the different inputs that we have in the DTC model today, from freight, marketing, talent, et cetera, analytics, there's a piece where you can probably go too far. And so you got to be careful there not to go too deep. But I would say you have to do it at the SKU level because some just might not make sense anymore. Or it might make sense in the DTC model, but not in an Amazon model because of the entitlements, discounts, whatever structure that you have. So you got to kind of weigh that and have P&L almost by channel now, honestly.
That's to make it even more complicated, right? Interesting though. I do agree. It's almost P&L by a digital channel at this point in time. It's why I have a lot of people. I mean, nobody's going to beat the FBA like fulfillment costs, but storage is completely different. Storage allocation, whether you get it or not, especially in larger items and you get into Q4, it's been fun to watch first Amazon has way too much inventory space and they sell a bunch off and now they don't have enough inventory space. And so allocations are coming again. But it's going to be fun to track that as we get into Q4. But also if we think about P&L and then another part of what you were talking about is the marketing side. How do you look at marketing, on direct to consumer versus Amazon and maybe even getting into retail media and stuff like that? How are you allocating it today? What does that look like? What is a good percentage that people should be applying, knowing that, as you noted, like overall cost of market is up 30 to 40% from a couple of years ago?
It's a challenging space, I'll say, and I'll be curious. Anyone in the network that has different opinion on this, I'm very curious to see how much people are spending as a percentage of their total. I would say we're fairly new to the DTC space in my current role, at East Point Sports. So I think I might be a little bit skewed from an initial launch perspective of what we do, but from an Amazon piece, we're on a 1P model. So right now we're spending X percent as a current of shipped revenue. But the interesting part on the Amazon piece is we've done a pretty good shift from a domestic model to a DI model. And so if you take that into account using a percentage of revenue, shipped revenue on Amazon, if you make that big shift from from DOM to a DI model, you have to still generate just as much POS. So your overall contribution margin could look lower because you're spending more just to generate as much POS dollars, but your shipping dollars have less because you're doing more DI. So there's a really complex model there that you have to take into account when it comes to how do you look at your spend as a percentage of revenue that you're actually actualizing to the business versus what you're selling through to customers. And so you got to think about that from a retail side. From a DTC side, I think at launch, I think on average, people can correct me if I'm wrong. I think on average, people were looking at anywhere from 13 to 20% spend to your total retail or your total generated revenue on DTC side. I think you might have to go more onto the 17 to 23 to 25% in the future, just given, I think, digital advertising costs 30 to 40%, depending the channel, harder to track and attribute. But the challenges there with shipping costs is where's the point of diminishing returns? So I think you're going to have to find ways to do more with less, because I don't think you can all of a sudden go from, let's say you were spending 15% of your retail revenue to 20 to 25% overnight with increased cost and be okay with, a significant drop in contribution margin. So those are just high level estimates. Like I said, we're fairly new, not a tremendous amount of efficiencies gained in marketing. We're looking to enter some new markets. Obviously, you're going to have to overspend there. What I think of maybe spending 30 to 35% of launching a new site, you might have to spend 50 to 55% to go and acquire share to start. And you may not realize or not be able to achieve economies of scale of that spend, for 3 to 4 years, what might have been previously, 1 to 3. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm sure people have differing opinions, but that's just how I'm channeling it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is like nobody really knows. I spend my time talking to 20 or 30 brands a week, and nobody's figured it out yet. And every business is so different. And then you launch a new item. And what do you do with the new item launch? Or maybe you launch a new product line. And if we look back, just over what's happened over the past couple of years, total number of people bidding on search terms is, quintupled, right? And so the price that you're paying to advertise has not only gone up, but the amount of money you have to spend to maximize lifetime customer value, right? Customer retention, customer return rate is something that people have to realize. The cost of all of it's going up, and you have to come ready to play in the space. And in a lot of cases, at this point in time, you used to be able to do a lot of this stuff without like ad tech partners, right? But the reality is like now, if you're spending a significant amount of cash, you need, some kind of tech on the back end that's managing it all for you. I mean, the podcast that released today was with Adam over at Perpetua around, Amazon marketing stream, which gives you basically hourly data now that you have to be able to crunch, and you can't do it as a human, right? And this is kind of, I guess, the lead into the talent side, right? How are you looking at talent today? Because, talent cost is going up as well.
Yeah. And I think the conversation with Adam, I haven't heard the podcast, but, I've talked with Adam a few times. He's great. Perpetua services are great. We leverage them at my last company. But to your point, yes, humans can't do it anymore. The analytics and the skill set needed to do the type of data analysis that digital marketing has become is, I don't want to say impossible, but it's somewhat next to impossible in certain areas. When you're talking about receiving hourly data on hundreds of campaigns and you want to trend this out over time, I mean, just the skill set to analyze that data, that's not even taken into account if you want to set up a business intelligence sector to like ingest that and all the technical components to actually visualize a lot of that so you can actually wrap your head around it. I mean, that's my biggest thing is, you used to be able to, traditional marketing, or even early on digital marketing, spend X, generate Y in impressions, estimate by conversion, and then you could get a significant output of like, hey, here's your return on ad spend. Now, when you're talking about Amazon Marketing Stream, Marketing Cloud, et cetera, like the attribution models and the skill sets, both on the personnel and the technical side to do that type of analysis. I mean, how do you factor that into a P&L? Because a lot of that is not revenue generating. It might be cost savings because you're doing it efficiently and you're analyzing that amount of data, but how do you factor that into P&L? You didn't have to do that 10 years ago in certain areas. So from a talent piece, I'm really looking at it as how analytical are you? Because in DTC and Amazon, whatever it may be, yes, there's a huge product marketing component to it, but at the end of the day, it's a widget. And how can you analyze that widget to make it the most efficient contribution piece to your bottom line? And that really just comes down to analyzing significant amounts of data, either externally with marketing or internally with, operating costs, et cetera. And you got to figure out a way to blend that together. And that's really comes down to the analytical talent. And it's a hard skill set to find. And they don't teach it a lot of times, and that's the hard part that you got to learn on the fly.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm running a class today in the digital space anywhere, if I'm at a university and I'm setting up a curriculum, I'm literally putting a science class in there. And it's going to be mandatory in teaching the scientific method over and over again, because that's what it is, right? It's not just, the scientific method isn't just randomly throwing stuff up against the wall and seeing what sticks, right? It's picking what you're going to throw up exactly against the exact wall you're going to throw it up, analyzing what happens, taking the results, and then doing it all over again, right? You set a hypothesis, you select your variables, you execute, you analyze, and then you keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again. And you're right, that skill set is not taught routinely in the marketing arena today. And yet that's what's happened over the past 5 years, is that mindset needs to be there. And I think a lot of times when we take a look at the winners and the losers in the space, or the ones that are really excelling, the people who are driving it have that, like you're saying, the analytical, that scientific mindset. And the second half of that, which is easier to say but harder to do, is to accept, that even a failed, marketing campaign, a failed experiment, that's an event. It's not a person. And you can still learn from that and change and adapt and have the next one go without taking it personally, without feeling like you're a failure. And then that builds into, what is leadership, and does leadership accept failure or not? And if you get a leadership team that accepts failure, and if you get a manager or somebody running marketing that's willing to fail, like lights out, like things are going to explode. It's going to work out. It's going to be awesome. Because that's where we need to go. Obviously, then you also need the cash behind it to execute the marketing campaigns. But no, I agree with you. The analytical mindset is pretty much required at this point in time within marketing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think you said it really well overall. And I think, to go one level deeper on there, I think, 5-10 years ago within the DTC space, you kind of had your merchandising managers and your content people, your designers, et cetera. And then you had kind of your digital marketing folks. But now we're talking about, when I look at talent, there's more finance people coming into the digital marketing and DTC space than I think ever before. I mean, I'm pretty sure vendor managers I've worked with previously, even right now, like they have finance backgrounds, accounting backgrounds, like heavy analytical pieces. I've heard people hiring in the Amazon space, like actuaries, people that can do unheard of mathematical and quantification of modeling. You didn't hear about that 5-10 years ago. I mean, maybe that was happening. I just wasn't exposed to it. So maybe I shouldn't say it wasn't happening, but that's what you're seeing more and more in this space, that you need to have those type of skill sets to win. And I think, to your point about leadership, yeah, you have to have leadership because that accepts failure. I think the people that win can quantify that failure and be, you know what, I just miscalculated. Here's what we learned. I'll apply this to my next model and we'll go from there. And I think as long as leadership is willing to hear that out and be like, hey, listen, the modeling looks sound that we thought, let's change it and go forward. That's what's going to win in the future. But you got to start with some extensive modeling, and that takes some serious talent that I don't think was necessarily the majority in DTC, Amazon, whatever may be in e-commerce 5-10 years ago.
Oh, no, it wasn't. It wasn't across the board, but I do agree. In the future, what I see happening right now on the talent side is, so when the pandemic hits and everybody scrambles to digital, there's a lot of people who are very opportunistic, and they jumped into LinkedIn and they updated their profile with put digital in front of it. So you had somebody that was doing a little bit of content management here and there, and they jumped into LinkedIn and they put digital content management. And so then companies went out to hire and they naturally go to LinkedIn. They're all of a sudden inundated. There's all this talent out there in digital, but it's not real talent, right? It's just people who had updated the profile. But, like you were saying, that the talent costs have gone up. With those talent costs going up, people put digital in front of their name, all of a sudden they can leave their company, get a 20, 25%, 50% in some cases pay increase with no change in real skill set. And what I'm seeing a lot happen right now is, the HR departments that had gone out and hired these people, and no fault of their own, like they're now being tasked with hiring people at a rate that they haven't ever had to before in a category or in a vertical, the digital space, that they don't really understand, that they hired a bunch of people. And what they're realizing now is the people that they went and hired, 80% of them weren't really digital people. And now I'm seeing a big churn come through of, hiring managers come back and saying, hey, we need real digital talent. We need real digital talent. These people didn't work out. 1 in 5 did. But there's a big churn that's starting to happen right now as companies go back and reevaluate the talent and realize, hey, they're falling behind because they don't have the right people in the right seats on the bus. And so that's been interesting to follow across the board. Now, what does that mean? I don't know if that brings, compensation down or if it just holds it steady and it doesn't keep going up at the rate it was going up. As everything was going, crazy over the past couple of years. So I don't know if you've seen the same type of thing happen or.
Yeah, I think I actually haven't heard that viewpoint now, so I'm glad you shared. I can't say I've seen that per se. I would say that said, I've been very blessed with the teams I've had around me, my current team, my previous team. Part of that, to your point, I think one interesting piece is companies that didn't have digital talent all of a sudden needed it. Those people vetting digital talent probably had no idea what they were looking for and what true was, right? And, I was very fortunate based on my background. Like I had pretty extensive experience and was able to be pretty picky about, who was needed. I would say I hired some very senior level talent, but then I also some very junior level talent that we were allowed to train and bring them into the e-commerce fold and mold them, that were less expensive, but we could teach them some of the pieces that would be beneficial for their careers and just what was needed for digital at that time. So I've been very lucky and very blessed to the team around me. And that's ultimately what has fueled a lot of our success that we've seen, across the companies. But to your point, what does that do for the future? And how do you weed out what's true talent versus what's quote unquote, I don't want to say fake talent, but maybe less experienced talent? That's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out, because I don't think overnight, to your point of the pandemic, like 1,000 times or quintuple more times, like you said, the talent is needed. It's not like all of a sudden that digital talent just appeared. And so I think it's going to be a slow growth. I think that's what's going to put strain on companies, that you're going to have to find 1, 2, 3 people that are seasoned that can do more with less versus building an army. And which I think was previously how e-commerce businesses were built in certain areas, where if you were lucky enough to have a digital first business, like you built a good amount of people around that. Now you have to kind of figure out a way, how can you do more with less? And from a compensation perspective, I think there might be a little bit of a right sizing. Or, you're seeing right now, there's some big companies that went DTC only or digital first, some massive layoffs across it, 10, 20% across the board. And you don't want to see that either. So what might happen is those that were able to acquire really good talent in the e-commerce space because of big brands or whatever it may be, and now they're like, hey, we overbuilt and we have to shed some of the layers. There might be some really good e-commerce talent that comes out there that maybe some of the second, third tier brands weren't able to go get just because they couldn't afford it, or they didn't have, the recruiting, highlights that some of these big brands coming through. Some of that talent might come out now because of some of these, fat shedding exercises as we kind of right size the norm of, e-commerce businesses, revenues overall, just given the macroeconomic environments coming out of the pandemic, et cetera. So there could be some good talent available that companies may be able to get if they were in the situation of like, hey, we were 4 of the 5 that didn't work out from e-commerce talent perspective. So might be an opportunity there in the future.
No, I completely agree. What do you get like the most excited about? Like, what are you amped about for the next 3-4 months, the next year, whatever it might be? I think there are a lot of macroeconomic issues going on. A lot of people are kind of stressed right now. Inventory levels seem to be at an all-time high for a lot of companies out there. Like, what's the bright spot? Like, what do you get excited about?
Yeah, I think these times are tough, right? I think one thing, and maybe this is just me as a leader, but like I get excited about these times. These tough times are when you really see your team and your individual character and your resiliency. I think right now, if I look at the next 6 to 12 months, like if you can survive in the e-commerce space, you keep your team motivated, your retention is positive, you get some wins in PO and, retail sales, one down the next. But if you can survive the next, I think 6, 12, hopefully not 18 months, but feeling more positive about the back half of next year, early part of 24. If you can survive, I think that really starts showing who can make it in e-commerce and who can't. And maybe that's the athlete in me or something like that, from a high school perspective or collegiate perspective. But I think that makes me excited. Like, if you can get your team through this as a leader, you should really give yourself a pat on the back, because that's a win right there. I think overall, I'm most excited also to see like what happens like with shipping and operational costs. Like, we've operated under some tremendous pressure over the past few years. I'm excited. There's some downward movement in some freight rates. We saw some good news, even as of yesterday. Like, how do we get back to more normalcy to figure out and level set a baseline, and then we grow again from there? And I think that's kind of the next trend is, 23 is probably going to be more of like a baseline. 24 is going to be kind of more of a natural growth cycle. And 25, we get back to being more predictable, I would say. So the positive outlook, I think, over the next 2 to 3 years is exciting to me. I think if you only look to the next 6 to 9 months, that's a little bit doom and gloom. So I think you have to look on the horizon. The last piece, I think, is, I'm with a brand new company, basically a brand new team, and we have a lot of things to work through. And if we can get through those, I think there's some positive momentum on the horizon that could be really good for our organization. And so seeing our team win will be positive for me. I'm trying to think of anything like tactical, that I'm interested to see the shakeout. There's iOS changes and stuff that we're working through. I think this one news about Amazon's warehousing launch that they just released, I think 2 days ago. What is that? How does that impact people's Amazon's business? How much is that leverage? To your point, we were told that Amazon had excess capacity, and all of a sudden it flipped overnight and they don't have enough capacity. But then they released that they have all this extra space for long-term storage. Like, what does that do to people's Amazon's business? And how does that impact their P&L? How does that impact the overall selling fees and everything that you have to do about running an Amazon business? I'm very curious to see what that shakes out in an overall business model for them.
Yeah, for sure. If anybody can accurately predict what Amazon is going to do, and or Amazon's POs or the next marketing release, or why it doesn't accept pricing increases, they'll have $1 billion company for sure. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I have my own conjectures on the warehouse piece just because everybody's so over-indexed, but it also bleeds into, why the POs. I had a lot of people post Prime Day reach out because they weren't getting POs. And, I think the short of it is, my own kind of, analysis and thought on it is, Amazon, in a time of scarcity, it wants to own as much of your inventory as possible. And so the POs went back out and they would stock up. This has been the past couple of years with 10 to 12 weeks inventory, and they blow through it on a Prime Day and then they go right back there. But in a time when things aren't scarce and they know everybody's sitting on, months and months of inventory, they know they don't have to hold as much. And why would they hold 12 weeks if they know they can sit on 3 in the instant you send a PO, or they send a PO, you're going to fulfill it to get it back in there because you're sitting on so much. And so I think they're playing the scarcity game perfectly. I mean, and they've never indicated otherwise, right? I mean, their statement from the beginning is, a brand's margin is their opportunity and they're going to come for it. And it's kind of where I think one of the original podcasts I'd done with John Giorso was around how to view Amazon, and don't view them as a retailer, view them as a platform.
Yeah.
And that is the number one lesson that needs to be taught upwards within organizations when it comes to Amazon is they're a platform. They're a Facebook, a Google, or I should say a Meta or a Google. They're not a retailer, and therefore you're not getting the top to top. They're not negotiating with you, in a partnership type manner. It's the platform. Do you want to use it or not?
Yeah.
And so that's been it's been interesting is that's really evolved. That mindset has evolved. It's got to be taught upward within an organization. Would love to hear your thoughts there. And then any final things that you think we should have got to today, but we didn't?
Yeah, fair. I'll take the latter last. I think the point of Amazon platform. So one of the things I cringe about and I've experienced, over the past 4 or 5 years is being called a sales leader. When you oversee Amazon or e-commerce, I'm going, these are platforms. Like this isn't, come up with a product, write a price and sell it. There are so many components of running an Amazon business, e-commerce business that being called a sales team or a sales leader just makes me cringe. And that's no disrespect to anyone. I think it's just kind of a false misconception, honestly, because there's so many different avenues. And I'm not discrediting any sales organizations out there. I just think I think your perspective on that podcast is perfect because it's a platform and you have to manage the platform.
I'll give you a quick funny story just on that note was, when I was on the corporate side and selling into Amazon at a vendor account, and, I put in, basically they take everything. It's called the everything store for a reason. So then we go and load in to Salesforce and they're like, wow, you sold in the entire line. And I'm like, well, kind of. And then you put the demand in and you put in one case and they're like, wait, what's going on? You sold, and there's all this congratulations. Wow, you sold an entire line. I was like, no, I filled out a spreadsheet and hit upload. Right? I did a new item setup form. They literally take it, and I had to take some of the sales team out there on the VMS side, and you sit down in the room, and they brought in their video, and there was no screens in the room at the time, and they tried to show it on their little laptop, this promo video on why they should take the product. The vendor manager's like, I'll just take it all. Like, we didn't even get through the minute. It's like, are you kidding me? We'll just take it all. And they were like, no way. We sold it all in. Yeah. You know how this works, right? Like, it's the everything store. There's no real sales going on here. So, I mean, it just, I'm a scientist of background, which is maybe why everything worked out well, as I didn't go in there with that sales mindset. But yeah, nothing against sales teams. It's a completely different mindset. Yeah, anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you just had me chuckling about the congratulatory emails that came out when I literally uploaded a new item setup form.
Yeah, your penetration rate goes through the roof when you can sell every SKU in the line. But yeah, you're right. The infinite digital shelf. I think, this might lead into a little bit of hey, what we didn't talk to today, but what you could do at the infinite digital shelf a few years ago, where Amazon takes everything. I think Amazon will continue taking everything, but all the companies out there have to be very careful about the margin targets, about the products they're putting on there. Because once you start that initial product or that margin, good luck going the opposite. So I think that mindset of shifting from selling everything to being very selective of what you do sell so that you have positive results off the bat from a margin perspective, I think Amazon's going to be more cautious about making sure that they're making a little bit more money on their products on the retail side versus relying on every other aspect. So you're going to have to be thoughtful about that. But so that was kind of one piece. But the other piece, you mentioned what I'm excited about. I still have a love and passion for the global marketplace and e-commerce space. I got exposed to Tmall and Rakuten and, Zalando in Europe. I think one thing I'm excited and interested to hear on is how are these competitors, quote unquote, of Amazon in their select regions going to fare out over the next, 5 to 10 years? Certain regions are gaining space faster than others. And I think, do you want to be a brand that sells on all, select, none? How do you do that profitably? What investments are the other companies going to make that are competitors of Amazon or Tmall going to do to try and go take share? That whole space that exploded kind of over the last pandemic where everyone was like, hey, we need to sell everywhere. Who do we go do that? I'm very curious about it. And I kind of have a passion. I try to keep watch on what is happening in the global e-com lens, even though right now we don't play there all that much. But I think, who's going to go up against Amazon? Because Target has made it very clear that, they're going to be very selective about their marketplace. Walmart, marketplace and back and, fulfillment services and direct. I think there's a little bit of back and forth there. We'll see how that shakes out. But who's going to go and compete against that and how are they going to do it? So I'm curious to see where that all shakes out over the next coming years.
Awesome. Love it. Well, Matt, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for being such a great friend, partner, supporter of the network as well. Just great to have you on here. We'll make sure you have you back because I think maybe we'll have to tackle that international piece. I think that's going to be an upcoming topic. I mean, right now on the docket, upcoming, we also have the fulfillment one and the supply chain one. That's going to be, I think, be key for people to tune into as well, just because it's again, it gets back to kind of the title of this whole thing, which was the ever, growing cost of running an e-commerce business. But, thanks again, Matt, for your time today. And everybody, we're going to wrap up this episode. Really enjoy continuing this digital journey together. Everybody take care. Thanks so much.